Hello everyone to our next session, our first afternoon session. I hope you take a seat. I hope you all had enjoyed your lunch. My name is Reinisch. I'm a journalist, historian, and university lecturer. I guess most of you here know me from my reporting on the Palästina Solidarity movement in Austria and Germany. And today I have the honor to host the next session. The session is entitled Decolonisation and Liberation, the Relevance of Historical Models, Reflections on Liberation Struggles and what we can learn from them. It's a great pleasure for me to be asked by the organizers to host particularly this session, because for several years before I became a full-time journalist, I worked in university and academia and in university research, and my main research topic was national liberation movements with a focus on Northern Ireland and their international links and the solidarity with worldwide national liberation struggles. And in my research, I extensively published on the situation in Northern Ireland, Bosnia, and Lebanon. And what we can learn still from these national liberation struggles is the lasting links with the international solidarity movement. We particularly see it in Ireland. Ireland has established links with the Palestine Liberation Organization back in the 1970s, both links in relation to the armed resistance and political solidarity. And these links still exist. When we look at the media coverage from Ireland, there is huge solidarity with Ireland. Almost all parliamentarians, all people are clearly on the side of the Palestinian liberation struggle. Through Dublin, we have weekly marches and protests with tens of thousands of people. Ireland is about to introduce the so-called Occupied Territories Bill to ban all goods from the occupied territories. Dublin, its capital, has already passed a similar bill on a local level. And this is exactly the topic that we will discuss in this session today. It will range from the struggle, from the successful struggle against apartheid in South Africa, the struggle of Native Americans for civil rights, and so on. And all these struggles, particularly the South African anti-apartheid struggle, they are examples for our struggle against apartheid in Israel. On the podium with me today is Ronnie Barkan. He's an Israeli dissident, co-founder of Boycott from Within, and a member of direct action group Palestine Action. On Nakba Day 2022, he participated in the smashing up of the UK headquarters of Israel-based Elbit Systems. Barkan focused on challenging the discourse of lies of so-called liberal Zionism, those elements who seek to lend legitimacy to the fundamentally illegitimate Zionist project in Palestine. Second speaker is Ramzy Baroud. Ramzy is a journalist, author, and the editor of the Palestine Chronicle. He's the author of 6 books. His latest book, co-edited with Ilan Pappé, is called Our Vision for Liberation, Engaged Palestinian Leaders and Intellectuals Speak Out. His other books include My Father Was a Freedom Fighter and The Last Earth. Baroud is a non-residential senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs. And our third speaker is Roshan Dadoo. Roshan is coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition. She worked for the South African Foreign Affairs Department on the Israeli-Palestine desk and is a political counselor for the South African Embassy in Algiers. She grew up in exile and was an activist in the anti-apartheid movement and the PSC in the UK. The session will be moderated by Haim. So I want to welcome everyone on stage. You see, we have excellent panel with renowned speakers. All of them are experts in their respective fields, and I wish you all a very engaging, lively discussion where we as activists against Zionism and apartheid, I guess, will learn a lot from it. So over to you, Haim, now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieter, very much. Originally, we planned to have a speaker from Sinn Féin in Ireland, one of the MPs. One became very ill, and the other one, who was supposed to be here with us, had a family problem. So we were very lucky today to have Dieter presenting the session, because he's written his PhD about the Sinn Féin resistance movement, and I've asked him kindly to say a few words about that. Without further ado, we'll have now the speakers that were already introduced. We will start with Ramzy, go to Ronnie, and then to Roshan. And I think if you could each take about 15 minutes, because in the excitement of the picture taking, we have consumed about 20 minutes.
I was told 18 minutes, and I'm going to stick to my 18 minutes. And thank you very much for conceding the first session to me. I'm not going to claim that I am going to present a unique model. I want to contend that Gaza should be studied as a separate model than all the other national liberation models that exist. And I will try to explain why in a minute. Yesterday, there was this, a lovely lady came and asked me, why is Gaza different? What keeps Gaza going? Because it really does seem totally irrational what's happening. I mean, I don't know if we can look at any historical precedent that would explain to us that what is happening in Gaza is a normal occurrence in history, because it's not. I want you to imagine, and I'm sure you already have numerous uncomfortable times, a place that is about 360 square kilometers, 181 square miles, with a group of people, 2.3 million people, who are trapped there, permanently trapped. The vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza are youth, and the vast majority of the people of Gaza never stepped a foot outside of Gaza. They have a unique and idealist understanding of solidarity. They see themselves as people who are connected to every global struggle around the world. I grew up in a refugee camp in which the graffiti concerning Nicaragua, the Irish struggle, pictures of Nelson Mandela, pictures of Che Guevara are dotting the gray ailing walls of the refugee camp where I lived, as is the situation anywhere in Gaza. Whenever there is an anniversary of a successful revolution, an anniversary of a martyrdom of a leader, socialist, be it Islamist from the global south or anywhere else, somehow you are going to find traces of that in Gaza. We have always been engaged to the beat of international solidarity, and we felt that we never really felt entitled to solidarity as much as we felt that solidarity is entitled to our support. So we will hold protests. We celebrated when Nelson Mandela was freed, and the media completely ignored the mass protests and celebrations and the dances of Gazans. It doesn't matter. It mattered for us. I contend that Gaza is a very unique model that deserves to be studied from now on, and seriously so. On the one hand, Gaza cannot be seen as a place of victimization. Yes, Palestinians are victims, but there is a difference of being a victim and embracing your victimhood. And Palestinians especially those in Gaza, have not embraced their role as victims. And the proof to that is that when there was a temporary ceasefire in January, which never really truly actualized, you had nearly 1 million Palestinians going back from the south to the north. No one else would have done that. They are going back knowing that most likely the war is going to start again. They are going back knowing that their homes have been destroyed. I interviewed a woman who told me that she was very happy. I spoke to her on the phone from the Shati refugee camp. She told me she was very happy to come back to her home. I said, so that's great, Mabruk, the house is still standing. She said, no, it was destroyed. I said, oh, okay, well, you will rebuild. She said, well, those who were going to rebuild have died. I think she had like four children and her husband, and they've all been killed. Then I said, I can't help but ask, why are you happy? She said, I'm happy because the whole point of what Israel has done to my family is to ensure that we leave and we never come back. And I am going back. She said, because my husband has planted several olive trees in their backyard, and she wants to make sure that the trees are okay. How do you explain that in political language? What sort of discourse, what sort of intellectual lexicon that can actually explain that people who have just been victimized by this unprecedented genocide are actually finding reasons to feel happy, to feel proud, to declare this collective act of self-assertion that they are still standing and they are still fighting. But if you look at the history of Gaza, forget about the long history of Gaza. Forget about Gaza fighting Napoleon Bonaparte as he tried to occupy the rest of Palestine. Forget about Gaza as the last standing city in the face of Alexander the Great trying to conquer the Eastern Mediterranean. Forget about that Gaza. Just the Gaza of post-Nakba Gaza. These are a group of peasants, poor people, illiterate, who have lost everything. And for us, Palestinians, especially people like me, fallahin, peasants, land is honor. Land is everything. You lose your land, you lose everything. And the fact that they have been in that, experiencing that sense of collective shock, and they go into this place. I'm in the process of writing a new book about Gaza called Before the Flood. And I interviewed a group of people from Shati who are now in Khan Yunis, in Mawasi, because they have been pushed out. And they told me when their elders were dying as a result of the Nakba, they did not know where to bury them because they don't come from coastal regions. So they went and they buried them right on the beach. They didn't fully understand how the sea changes and the water goes up and down, and they woke up one morning and all the bodies were taken. All their dead were taken and swept into the sea. And I said, so what did you do? They said, well, we just found another place to bury our dead. Gaza has this ability to move on, not because they are unable to process emotions, but because they don't have time to process emotions. So they have to remain strong and steadfast at a level that, again, we cannot understand in academic language. I know that many of us use the word sumud, and sumud means steadfastness and this and that, but you have to internalize this language in Arabic, not in any Arabic, in Palestinian Arabic, to understand the connotation of the Palestinian political discourse. A term like sumud is not a sentimental term that describes the collective steadfastness of the people. It's a political term. Sumud is a political term, is a functional vocabulary that is on its own, it's enough for the people not to give up. So when the lady asked me, how do you explain this legend that is called Gaza, I wanted to explain in a language that can be relatable in English, and I really couldn't. The term muqawama, resistance, muqawama is not translatable. Quite often we kind of fall into the trap of trying to talk about what form of muqawama. Peaceful resistance, violent resistance. But the word muqawama in Arabic, it stands for itself. There are no derivatives of the word muqawama. You resist, that's what you do, and you have no other option but to resist. And this is not something that the Islamists do or the socialists do. It's not Hamas versus Fatah. Factionalism has nothing to do with it. This is a central point of unity among the Palestinian people that transcends time and place, ideology and faction. Adala, justice, is an innate term. We Palestinians, I am telling you the truth, we speak in international conferences and such about UN resolutions and humanitarian laws. Amongst ourselves, we don't. Because we already have a refined and a mature form of justice that is so deeply embedded in our society, whether we are Muslims or Christians. It is something that does not require validations, does not require citations, does not require historical references. What makes Gaza unique is the fact that Gaza should have been defeated a long time ago. Rationally, it should have been defeated a long time ago. This is why I think it was Shimon Peres, I don't know if it was Shimon Peres, but I think he was the one who said that, I wish I could wake up one morning and discover that Gaza has sunk into the sea. Was it Rabin? But they tried to sink it into the sea. There was numerous wars. Now genocide, extermination, no food, no water, no electricity, no innocence in Gaza. But they still can't sink it into the sea. What makes Gaza unsinkable? You can't tell me your leadership, because we don't have good leadership. Our leadership is in prison. Our leadership is Khaled Jarrar and Ahmed Saadat and Baroud and individuals who have a legacy of struggle, sustainable, real struggle that is connected to the masses, and that's why they are in prison. Our leadership is assassinated constantly. They don't even allow us the time to reflect and to organize a leadership. The only leadership that is acceptable for us is the leadership that is willing to collaborate with the enemy. So obviously, Gaza is not an outcome of the work and savvy and the strategy of a visionary leadership. It's to the opposite of that. The first fighting Palestinians in Gaza were the Fidaiyin, the freedom fighters. The Fidaiyin have this kind of resonance in our history, like, oh, the Fidaiyin. The Fidaiyin were peasants. Peasants who wanted to go back to their land and to collect the crops, because most Palestinians were pushed out of Palestine during the harvest season, and they left everything behind. So they organized to go back and get their crops. And then they start fighting the Israeli army that is now at the porous Gaza border, assassinating and killing anybody who dares cross. With time, the Fidaiyin became the Palestine National Liberation Army, and the Fidaiyin became the socialist militants, and the Fidaiyin became Hamas, and the Fidaiyin became every possible manifestation. This is why it bothers me greatly when people reduce Gaza and Palestine to Hamas versus Fatah. The resistance in Gaza has preceded all of these factional affiliations. It's bigger than all of these factional affiliations. And the sad thing is that Israel sometimes knows these things and we don't. Israel has always figured out that the real enemy is the Palestinian people. This is not about Hamas, it's not about Fatah. It's about the Palestinians as Palestinians. Those tough-minded, and simply undefeatable. Because it turned out that defeat and victory is also an idea. It's a notion. If you decide that under no circumstance will I ever give up, no matter what the balances of power, no matter the firepower of your enemy, you will remain undefeated. And the Palestinians have made that decision. And from the very first day of the war, I kept saying, Gaza is not going to fall. The resistance is not going to stop. Not because I have any sort of kind of a prophetic way of reading this, because I know the history of my people very, very well. And this is why I see Gaza as a model, because Gaza does not abide by geopolitics. Gaza does not abide by, this understanding that conflicts are essentially economic and they are related to natural resources and that sort of thing. What natural resources does Gaza have? It has none. Yes, I know there's the gas at the sea and all of that. But it's not like the Palestinians have ever controlled their natural gas or any of their resources. And what is there to fight for in Gaza anyway? I mean, the depleted uranium in Gaza is going to be there for a very, very long time. Gaza has already been declared uninhabitable by the United Nations in 2020. So what is Gaza now? But why aren't they leaving? Why are they still fighting? Why are they still strong? I lived during the first Intifada in Gaza. And my refugee camp was one of the most, one of the main platforms of the resistance. Hamas started there. The Popular Front, the socialists, were based in Nusayrat and other places. So when Israel wanted to collectively punish Nusayrat, it would be very long, perpetual punishment. Weeks, if not months, of military curfews. People would be shot the moment they would step outside or even dare open the windows of their homes. And yet somehow, people developed, this, what we talk about mutual aid. It is something that came innate to all of them, where young people would go in the middle of the night, they would go to the farms by the sea, they would come back with plastic bags with a cucumber, a tomato, a loaf of bread. They knew what family had children, and they would put a little bit of baby powder, and they would risk their lives. They would knock at the door, and they would throw it into the courtyard of the house, and that's how we survived. That was our solidarity. We didn't even know whom should we thank for this, for our very survival. There has always been a model that is so incredible about Gaza that I feel has went underappreciated to everybody's shock and surprise, to be honest. Even our own Palestinian intellectuals, and this is not an attempt to blame anyone in particular, this is just my reading of history, that quite often, because Gaza, we were told, is not important, Gaza has no territories and no natural resources, and Gaza is just too costly for the Israeli occupation to matter. As a result, if you look at our history books before the genocide, you're going to find that Gaza played a very, very small role in the way that history has written the struggle in Palestine. Because we talk about the territories, and we talk about apartheid, and we talk about the West Bank and the settlement, and Gaza has very little to offer regarding that. And as a result, we didn't talk about Gaza so much. And now we are all puzzled by this model called Gaza. A model that not only is exposing and defeated Zionism, but is unifying the world around the Palestinians, and is once more bringing to life the issue of the Palestinian struggle that until very, very recently, we were told, if you remember Jared Kushner, Palestinians can put up or shut up. Let the Arabs normalize, Palestinians do not matter. I don't think many people, not even in the US administration right now, would dare tell you Palestine and Palestinians don't matter. It does matter. And that's because of this place called Gaza. So we need to look at Gaza in a different way. One of the last lectures I have given in Gaza via Zoom was with a group of kids at Al-Azhar University. And the kids were asking me about the parallel between apartheid in South Africa and Gaza, and others asked about Ireland and all of that, which was great. But when I told them, I start asking the kids about where they come from, their families, where do they come from? I come from the village of Hamame, from Al-Batani, from Sawafir, from Beit Daras. And I would say, what do you know about your own village? And they were surprised that I cared. Because I'm supposed to talk about the perils between the Palestinians and others. That is kind of the modern take on the Palestinian struggle. It has to somehow be paralleled to some other struggle for it to matter or to factor in. So I asked them about their own families, and they were a little bit surprised, and shyly they answered. And I told them so much about their own villages because I have been writing about these villages for a long time. And I told them at the end that all these parallels between you and other struggles matters, and they matter greatly. So don't ever concede on that, because that's essential for our solidarity and for locating and understanding ourselves within the global struggle. But it matters a lot more that you locate yourself in your own history, to understand who you are, where you come from, so that you will know how to proceed with the struggle. It is the legacy of your great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents that made you who you are, and that delivered you to this particular point. So you need to understand yourself within your own model, as opposed to understanding yourself within other contexts and other models. So I really hope that now, this opportunity, what happened in Gaza, and I hate to use the word opportunity, and I will stop right there, I know I exceeded my time, is that we start thinking about Gaza as a way to learn about ourselves, to learn about our own struggles, not to lecture Gaza, not to tell us what form of resistance to use or not to use, not to judge us, not to put us within comparisons, you know, the extremists on both sides, that sort of thing. It's enough with that kind of language. Let's move to a whole new language in which we accept Gaza, not just accept Gaza for what Gaza is, but accept Gaza as a model of resistance that can be used and applied in every possible situation and no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramzy, for an amazing speech. I couldn't find it in myself to stop you, and I'm glad you saved me this, because it would be terrible to not allow you to finish this. And Ramzy is one of the most illustrious sons of Gaza, a journalist that explains this in a way that we have never heard it and probably will never hear it on mainstream media. The Israelis don't understand what they are facing, and so does the rest of the world, especially the United States and UK. So thank you again for really saying it like it is. We will now go to Ronnie Barkan, my dear friend.
Thank you so much, Ramzy, for what you said, for inspiring us, and also for reflecting to me my existence as a dissident coming from that place. Because it is kind of a mirror image, in a way. The steadfastness and the inherent sense of adallah and of being on the right side of the Palestinians is totally lacking. It is totally the opposite image within Israeli society. And actually the very foundation of the Zionist race state, literally on top of and at the expense of the Palestinians, is not only about taking the land, as we know, it is also fundamentally about exclusivity. It is about creating a place for them and only for them. And the way to do that in a place that is already inhabited by other people, there's only two ways that I know of, either ethnic cleansing or genocide. Either driving away the people or getting rid of them altogether. Some people treat Gaza as basically the work that hasn't been finished. They say, Feiglin, the deputy speaker of the Knesset not too long ago, is saying that Gaza and Jaffa are simply two Jewish towns on the shores of the Mediterranean. And the only difference between them is 19 years. We should do to Gaza whatever we did to Jaffa, where 95% of its people have been ethnically cleansed. Many of them are actually refugees in Gaza today. So the type of thinking of ridding themselves of the Palestinians is, I think, part of the Israeli identity. There is no Israeli identity that is not dependent on the denial of the existence of Palestinians. And that also means the denial of some deep-rooted existence in that place that they came to inherit from other people, to take over, to not even to take over, to terraform, to not only to take, but to transform altogether. And simply, they're still trying to transform that part that they haven't managed to do. But it's also a psychological aspect. And whenever I speak about Zionism, I say that it's not about the facts. For the Zionists, it's not about the facts. It's about the psychological phenomena. And again, it's just this mirror image of everything that you just said. You know, you have the honest Zionists. The honest Zionists are the ones who acknowledge the facts, and they have no problem with that. I respect that they acknowledge the facts, and they are the ones who say, yes, ethnic cleansing is not necessarily a bad thing. They're actually quite proud of it, and we see it happening in full view these days. And the other ones that like to think that they are the good guys in the story, they have to lie to themselves every moment of every day in order to feel that they are the good people in the story. And they do not care about the facts because they cannot see the facts, because they are self-delusional all the time. Now, I intended on speaking about solidarity, not offering a solution. I am not in a position to offer a solution, but rather it was very important for me to hear what Ramzy had to offer us and then to respond to that, to correspond with that. And also to learn from the past struggles and the present struggles in other places, like in South Africa. But I was thinking that what I can say about solidarity is that possibly in every struggle, the most important thing that I have learned, being with Anarchists Against the Wall, where we used to go every week to demonstrate in the West Bank and so on, and with all kinds of other struggles, I feel that the most important thing was to have, you know, the heart in the right place, but also to put the ego on the back seat, in the back seat. Not to be led by our ego, not to be led by whatever we think that the Palestinians or whoever is oppressed have to do. So we may have our different views about, it could be anything, veganism, feminism, but when we go to participate, we become partners in the struggle by our participation, by lending our presence and voice, and in a way also acting as human shields in a way, and this is also proven to a certain degree by our participation. And slowly, gradually, things evolve. And also all of a sudden, discussions about veganism and feminism and other things happen, not as a condition, but just as a natural way of working together. So coexistence is something that is for the future or for the stories. What we are talking about right now that is needed is co-resistance. And I think we all acknowledge that. But we are resisting for the same cause, with the same values, but coming from very different perspectives. And being as one among the privileged group, that is a question. How can I participate in that? And also, what is my role? So that is kind of this thing that I think every activist coming from, you know, the white folks in South Africa, the Israeli activists, the dissidents in Palestine, etc., they have to kind of figure out how to do that. Once we do accept this form of solidarity that really comes from the heart and really does not put ourselves at the center or at the front, then things also become very clear. Then all the other things, all the other veils of ignorance and so on just kind of drop off, because the situation is far from being complicated. It is very simple, brutal, barbaric, monstrous, but very easy to understand if we just put aside all those other things that kind of are preconceptions. And those things that we have to put aside, if we don't put them aside, I'd like to refer to some other examples in the past. I'd like to refer, for example, to the wonderful letter that Martin Luther King wrote in a letter from Birmingham prison, when he said about the white moderates, the liberal Zionists in our case. And he said that he has almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the greatest stumbling block for the black struggle is not the KKK, but actually those white moderates who for them, peace is the absence of tension, not the presence of justice. Those who think that they can dictate for the oppressed the ways and the means in which they should struggle against their oppression and the time frame in which they should do that. Those who try to dictate the time frame for another man's freedom. And I think that these are things that we try to take inspiration from, because we don't have that legacy of a struggle. We don't have that legacy within, you know, the privileged group in Palestine to hold on to. So we take inspiration from others, from Martin Luther King. I mentioned in the opening words about these wonderful flowers, and again, thank you to Marco for coming up with this wonderful idea. And we have the white roses and the yellow daffodils. The white roses to represent the anti-Nazi group, the Weiße Rose, who were struggling against Nazism, fascism, and paid with their lives. The yellow daffodils to represent Marek Edelman and the people of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And he created this tradition. We would get these yellow daffodils actually by an anonymous person every Passover Eve, actually. This is when the Ghetto Uprising started. And he would lay these yellow daffodils. And it so happens that on a Passover Eve, 75 years later, Gazans went out on the Great March of Return. And again, connecting these things, Marek Edelman himself, the deputy commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, was a staunch anti-Zionist with a Bund. And he remained anti-Zionist, and in his later years, he also expressed his support with what he called the partisans of the Gaza ghetto. And it's very important for me to try to connect these things, rather than trying to dictate, trying to take inspiration from those other people who have fought somewhat similar conditions. When I try to compare the situation of those Zionists to other struggles, for example, the abolitionists who struggled against slavery in North America, white people who joined the black struggle in South Africa, I have one problem, which is the dissident equation, the number game. According to my calculations, we are probably the dissidents among that group of privileged Israeli Jews, whatever you want to call them. According to my math, it's about 1% of a percent, of 1% of 1% of the population. It is such a negligible, such a small number. It is a negligible few people. I understand, I don't know the exact numbers, I understand that it was about possibly 5% or so in South Africa of the white people who were in support of the anti-apartheid struggle. Again, I don't know the numbers, probably no one knows, but among the northern states, those who supported abolitionism, it was maybe 1%. We're talking about 1% of that. So again, this idea of Palestinians who will never give up on Gaza is a mirror image to me to those very, very, very few who are not there to totally erase Palestinians off the face of the earth. Because there's pretty much 99.99 whatever % who do want to erase Palestinians off the face of the earth, because this is their thinking. This is the very type of psyche, the mental conditioning that they have. Maybe this is also an explanation, in a way, to the way that Palestinians have this really strong sense of sumud, no matter what. And I will end with that. Thank you for letting me realize where I come from in your words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronnie, for keeping to time as well. And I will ask now Roshan. I know that you have a very long list of topics, and we need to hear you, but try to keep it to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers, of course, for inviting us to come from South Africa to be here amongst you at the first Anti-Zionist Jewish Congress. And so, following on, which is a very, very hard thing to do from the last two speakers, I did make a very long list that I sent to Haim, but I will try very hard to keep within the time limits and maybe just indicate some of the themes, and we can, of course, raise them up further in the questions and discussions and so on. But I tried to gather my thoughts under the sort of bigger heading of solidarity and liberation from the global south. And I think the starting point for us is nothing to do with struggles being models for other struggles, but the words of Samora Machel, who said solidarity is not an act of charity, but mutual aid between forces fighting for the same objective. And I think that is the approach that we have in South Africa from the history of our struggle, and that we hope to bring to our solidarity at the moment, of course, particularly with the people of Palestine, as you know, for all the reasons that Ramzy has given as well, the situation in Gaza. But starting off from Zionism, I think we all have a consensus that Zionism is an integral component of the Western colonial project in the global south. It's not an add-on or an accidental outcome. It is an essential component of the Western colonial project in the global south. And as such, Zionism is essentially a white supremacist and therefore patriarchal political ideology. And it was born out of the science of race, things like eugenics, which served to justify racial discrimination in the interests of empire and colonial capitalism. So I think there is a consensus for once in a room around that, which is a great pleasure. So I want to start off, though, in terms of solidarity, talking about interracial solidarity, because the historical links between Zionism and apartheid South Africa predated the creation of Israel. It actually originated in the early years of the 20th century, and in particular in the friendship between British Zionist leader and later First President of Israel, Haim, and South African Field Marshal and later Prime Minister, Jan Smuts. And in fact, that friendship was instrumental in securing the issuance of the Balfour Declaration, and which supported, of course, in principle, the creation of Israel on Palestinian land. And so, of course, we all know later on in 1948, the year that the National Party came to power in South Africa, the same year, of course, that the State of Israel formed by the Nakba and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people started and declared itself a state. But the National Party in South Africa had supported Hitler before and during the war. They were deeply anti-Semitic, and my mum, who grew up in the small Jewish community of Pretoria, remembered the people who then formed the National Party marching around Pretoria dressed in brown shirts, emulating exactly what Hitler was doing. And their chants and cries were against Jews. They were doing exactly, they saw themselves all the way there in South Africa at that time as emulating Hitler. So, of course, they were imprisoned during the war once South Africa joined the war on the side of the Allied forces. But after the war in 1948, they came to power and they implemented the system built on the colonial legacy of the British of apartheid. So 1948 is another connecting year. And in fact, the architect of apartheid, Prime Minister at the time, Hendrik Verwoerd, was one of the first people, I think the first person might have been a Palestinian to make the analogy between between apartheid in South Africa and Israel. But Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd said Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. Now he should know because he invented apartheid. And he obviously was saying it as a compliment. And somehow the National Party did an about-turn, and they, as Zionism often does, and they instantly forgot their prior anti-Semitism because Jews, under the system of racial classification of apartheid, were classified and racialized as white. And that has made a huge difference to the way in which Zionism within the Jewish community in South Africa has become, as we see now, in terms of the way that Trump is weaponizing the idea of, well, it's not really weaponizing, but using the argument of there being a white genocide in South Africa as a way of trying to belittle the fact and try and get us to withdraw the case against the actual genocide that's taking place in Gaza. Anyway, so that's how, the Jews under apartheid then benefited from the system of apartheid. They were designated as white and they enjoyed all the privileges that entails. But there was a more deeper connection between the two apartheid states. Israel was an important arms supplier to apartheid South Africa, breaking the international arms embargo, and as late as 1980, 35% of Israel's arms exports were destined for South Africa. Israel was really loyal until the bitter end to the apartheid state, even when a lot of other countries in the world had started to distance themselves. And in particular, during the 70s, they worked together very closely on their nuclear programs. And Israeli experts helped South Africa to develop at least 6 nuclear warheads. At the time when the global anti-apartheid movement had forced states to impose sanctions on the apartheid regime, Israel imported South African goods and re-exported them to the world as a form of inter-racist solidarity. And so we can see now with the threat of nuclear powers, with Israel's nuclear capabilities, nuclear weapons capabilities, I should say, how that came about. Of course, South Africa decommissioned its nuclear weapons post-1994. So I think we have to, in the framework of understanding our solidarity in the face of interracial solidarity between these apartheid states. And I think the term apartheid is still of value. It took 10 years for it to become a consensus that Israel is an apartheid state, is committing the crime against humanity of apartheid. It started in 2001. I'm sure there were people here who were at the World Conference Against Racism Civil Society Forum in Durban in South Africa, and that was, at that time, there was Palestinians that came from, I think, nearly everywhere, from 48, from the West Bank, Gaza, the refugee camps, the diaspora, and met together there. And at that moment, there was a big push and a big fight back within that conference to get the word apartheid referred to Israel as an apartheid state. But it took over 10 years before that finally now has become a consensus, and in fact in the UN language. There were many examples, I'll rush through them, but it just recently, as 2017, you remember that Rima Khalaf, who was the Secretary General for the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, was pressurized by the current UN Secretary General to withdraw her report that accused Israel of imposing an apartheid regime on Palestinians. Now, that's pretty recently. But then there was, of course, the rush of reports, and of course it's true, people will only take it seriously when it's Western NGOs and also Israeli ones. There was B'Tselem's report, there was Human Rights Watch, and then there was Amnesty International, although each one did extend the other one further. And finally, there was Al-Haq's report, and I think that's an important one, firstly because it was a Palestinian report, but also because it describes apartheid as a tool of settler colonialism. And if you remember quite early on in Francesca Albanese's first mandate as Special Rapporteur, she made the comment that South Africa has dismantled apartheid, but not yet the underlying system of settler colonialism. And I think that's important to remember, the term of apartheid as being a tool of an underlying settler colonial system. And I think in that sense, when we talk with Palestinians, we have a discussion around what that might mean in terms of don't use South Africa as a model. Yes, to some extent, but don't do the things we did. And I think Ramzy knows those discussions that take place. And in that sense, it's, you know, obviously it's a form of our solidarity against, not as models for each other's struggles, but against the racist apartheid states' solidarities. And just to say that in terms now coming to what we can do and should be doing and could do more of, in our struggle, we identified 4 pillars of struggle. We had the underground organization, we had the mass mobilization, including the workers' trade union struggle, we had the armed struggle, and our 4th pillar was international solidarity. And without that 4th pillar, it would not have given the support to the other 3. It would not have enabled the other 3 to have continued. And I think, you know, we can see, I think we have to admit BDS is a success. I mean, we did dismantle apartheid, and that was largely due to the efforts of ordinary people around the world. Thatcher's Britain didn't want to lose its relationship with apartheid South Africa. It pushed and pushed and pushed for every conceivable way around it in terms of supporting Bantustans, in terms of all kinds of so-called compromises, getting rid of petty apartheid, as it was called. But it was people's power that pushed her. The same in America. It was Ronald Reagan. It wasn't as if this is the first time we are confronting extremely reactionary states and trying to put that pressure on them. Of course, there are many differences and there were many advantages then. There was the Soviet Union and countries in the global south that had a much stronger impact in the international system. But still, I think we have to remember it was not just some simple thing that happened. We, all of us made this happen in the case of South Africa. And we are doing so again. I mean, if you look at the BDS successes, the dock workers in France who recently stopped 14 tons of military equipment on a ship, and the same in Morocco, dock workers taking action. Morocco has normalized relations with Israel, where they face not only firing from their jobs, but being imprisoned. Palestine Solidarity activists, all the time they're getting imprisoned and facing all sorts of repression. In Norway, the Norwegian pension fund, the largest pension fund that disinvested. Antigua and Barbuda, who are now refusing to flag the ships that are carrying these military and dual-use items to Israel. And even the chairman of the Israeli Export Institute, Avi Balashnikov, said BDS and boycotts have changed Israel's global trade landscape. Now, we know that Israel's propped up financially, economically by America. If you take that away, Israel's collapsing economically. It's tanking. It's not sustainable in any sense or shape or form. So if we keep putting the pressure on, and obviously particularly on American companies and in America, I think we can really make an impact, even though it might feel very bleak, and even though in the face of genocide, it's very hard not to feel we need to do one thing now immediately and solve the problem. We know that unfortunately isn't possible. And I think finally, just very quickly, 3 points around the politics of liberation and what role there is for particularly organizing as anti-Zionist Jews. I think, first of all, taking action in the country where you are, because that's the exact opposite of the Zionist ideology of saying, no, you always have this country you can go to, and this is the homeland, and blah, blah, and 3,000 years or whatever the story is. And I think that's important. We take action where you are. Join BDS movements, start BDS movements, find out what universities' funds are investing in. Join the student movements in the countries and places, and everywhere is a field of struggle wherever you find yourself. And I think that, you referred to the role of Jews and white South Africans in our struggle. I mean, so take my mother. She was there growing up in this little Jewish community in Pretoria. Her family her sisters became Zionists very early on. And they moved to Israel in the 50s, and my family continues to live there. She joined the South African Communist Party. She saw that if you're going to start from the experience of the brown shirts and anti-Semitism, taking that to mean, well, why are we discriminating against people here? What does that mean for why do we do that? Why are we seen here as privileged whites when at the same time that's going on? And there was a disproportionate amount, there was a very small number of white people that joined the organizations like the Communist Party, but there was a disproportionately large number of them were Jews, which is just by the by. But meaning that if you're taking action in your country, as has been said, of course, by Stephen Kapo, and fighting fascism, fighting anti-racist struggles, we're still trying to take action in South Africa very quickly, although we took the case to the ICJ, which was extraordinary and brilliant. At the same time, we're not implementing the decisions that we then brought about. We're still fighting to stop South African coal going to fuel a genocide. It goes to the Israeli electricity grid, goes to fuel the illegal settlements, the military. No electricity is getting into Gaza, so it's very clear. All the coal, 700,000 tons per ship that we can track, leaving Richards Bay Coal Terminal, is going to literally fuel the genocide and illegal occupation. That's a campaign that we have found also means we can intersect our struggles with environmental activists, with mining-affected communities. And I think that sort of intersectional struggle is where we need to be taking things from where we are and joining up the dots together. Similarly, as Katie Halper mentioned in the example about struggles against ICE, and also additionally Black Lives Matter, it's not that they're being hijacked. We're not hijacking other people's struggles. We're intersecting our struggles because we're fighting for the same objective. And the second point, I'm really rushing through this, but the second point, I think, for people who are active as anti-Zionist Jews is challenging the notion of Zionism, including Christian Zionism. Because the hasbara that the Zionists are using now, particularly in Africa, is around whataboutery, but it's what about the DRC? What about Sudan? You don't care about the struggles in your own continent. Why do you care about Palestine? And this is said by people like vice-chancellors of universities who are managing to block Senate resolutions on the academic boycott. And of course the answer is we're intersecting our struggles, which we are. We're intersecting our struggles with migrant communities, with the Congolese Solidarity Campaign in South Africa, with Sudanese as people in South Africa drawing the links, trying to see how these struggles come together. And of course they are raising up the issue of Palestine because they understand the struggle. But that's the current hasbara that we need to deal with. And in fact, the biggest challenge is Christian Zionism and the way in which churches, the traditional churches, are not taking a stand on Palestine. That's affecting, or that's the biggest challenge to growing a broader solidarity movement. And if you look at that Pew poll, look at the 3 African countries, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, and see what you think. I have to wind up now. Finally, rejecting any kind of ethno-nationalist ideas like Bantustan's, and I consider the 2 states so-called solution to be a Bantustan. I think, just to say, the conference coming up in the UN this week, in which countries are going to be, all of our state parties will be just debating a 2-state solution. I don't think, we should use the language of solution. We should use the language of liberation. We're supporting the Palestinians in their struggle for liberation, and that means the right of return. And that does not mean that we look at ways in which recognizing their different, new ways of recognizing Israel. Now, we also have to make the difference between Eretz Israel and liberated Palestine. It's obvious, but when it comes to the current moment where the states are trying to shore up the dead-in-the-water two-states so-called solution, and I read that Trump is saying to states, boycott the UN two states. I don't know if that's true. I saw some headlines saying that. Then we have to make the difference that we stand for liberated Palestine. We stand for what the Palestinians' right to self-determination and their right to return. And nothing else will do. And we will keep fighting, not only to end the genocide and the ceasefire, but also to dismantle the system of apartheid and the underlying settler colonial Zionist project that underpins it. Thanks.
Thank you, Roshan. You can never stop a seasoned activist in mid-flow, and you have managed to get all your points in. So this is incredible. I just want to make two very short points before I give you the chance to ask questions. Let us remember that Palestine is the last, not just the latest, but certainly, we hope, the last settler colonial state. They have had a lot to learn from many other settler colonial projects. So, but so have the Palestinians. So what we can say for sure is that Palestine is unique, Gaza is unique. It is not like any other struggle. It is also the test of humanity. The litmus test of humanity in the 21st century is what we do about Gaza, and it's not a test we can fail, and our leadership has failed it totally until now. And on a day that they are bringing the destruction to other places, we need to call for the end of Zionism in a clear manner like never before. So I will open the floor to questions, and I think we have not more than about 18 minutes. And please, let's have the microphones in place.
Thank you so much. So you heard, we only have 18 to 20 minutes. Keep them short and safe. Thank you.
Hello. I would like to ask what I wanted to ask actually before, and it's great that you're here from South Africa. What is the lesson Palestinian, or what should Palestinians take from the South African struggle, like after the apartheid? What was the biggest mistake? I think there was this economic problem that without economic, reparations, you cannot really get this inequality from the system. So if you can elaborate on that, and if there's something else with getting rid of apartheid, Palestinians should watch out for. It's not.
Thank you. Short. I'll be starting at the back and coming to the front. My partner is not here. So please keep short question. Thank you.
I'll try. Thank you so much. It was learned a lot and very inspiring. Ramzy, you said it was figured out that Palestinian people are the enemy. And just to go back a little bit, so who are the? I need to explain the question. So sorry, and I try to be short. So who are our enemies? This is also very important. And so when we think, these enemies are not only asocial. When I think about world leaders, they are anti-social, anti-communal, And I can continue, you know, some leaders, world leaders even said that society doesn't even exist, right? Which a little bit goes onto the level of individualism and ego as such. The question is, when we think about Palestinian people as now as a kind of a essential people among many peoples, and the question is, to what extent do you think that, you know, like we can think that we the people, you know, this sentence about we the people, that we identify much more with the Palestinian people? As I'm trying to explain the question because it has a long thing, but how, if you understand, so to what extent do you understand, you know, we the people as the Palestinian people?
Hello, I have a very simple question, which is kind of related, but I'm wondering maybe what is the enemy instead, rather than who, and if identity or ideology is getting in the way.
Hi, thanks a lot for all the contributions from the speakers. My question would be if from the past liberation struggles, anti-colonial struggles, in how far, like Roshan mentioned the need for intersectional struggle, in how far do you see the need for being clearly anti-capitalist in all liberation and anti-colonial struggles?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I don't want to be a party pooper, but I was very upset to hear what about the DRC. I do not think that Palestine is unique. The Congo has been struggling since colonialism. We had the first genocide, now we have the second genocide. We're talking 15 million dead since 1996, and it's very sad to say that Mandela participated in this regime change, in this US regime change in 1996. So my question really is, what about the DRC, and why is there no more solidarity with a clear neo-colonialism in Africa, which is beyond comprehension for many of us, because what's happening today in Congo is exactly what is happening in Palestine.
I have a question. Sorry. I wanted to ask, I think considering the history of the PLO, I'll be short, is there a chance that there will be some kind of new unified force for the Palestinians that can lead the struggle and unite the four pillars that were mentioned and unite us and help us to be a more effective solidarity by having clear Palestinian leadership beyond what we all recognize as the BDS? Do we have a chance of seeing that in the next 5-10 years?
Thank you.
I have a question to Roshan. Can you give some examples, elaborate on how you incorporate intersectionality in our struggle?
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hi. We've been talking about parallels to Gaza. There's nothing the same as Gaza. There are things that might be as bad as. One of the parallels to Gaza that I think about is the Western Sahara, and I wonder whether the panel would like to comment on Morocco's support for Israeli occupation and genocide in Gaza in return for Western approval of their occupation of the Western Sahara and actually the latest UK government deal with Morocco.
And Spanish government.
Hello, my question is regarding the current situation in Gaza and also the total siege now of the West Bank. Do you think there's some kind of a chance of, like, people have been speculating for a couple of weeks and months and over again, of a third intifada, and if it's like too late for an intifada, for a third one, or if like that no intifada is, well, at least not from occupied Palestine, but from outside?
Thank you.
I have a question about German society. About 80% of all Germans are against what Israel is doing, and yet how do we motivate them to start boycotting, start being more active? Like, how do we get them more involved, if that is even possible?
That's for the next panel.
Oh, sorry.
About sanctions.
That's for the next panel. Do we have time? Do we need more questions, or do we have enough? Enough.
Well,
okay.
One short question for my Brazilian comrade here. She asks, how is the standing of the population of Gaza regarding the resistance forces and fighters?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions. I'm sorry, not everybody can ask their questions. Sorry for that.
Thank you. So you have quite a lot of questions to consider. Please, each of you, choose what you want to relate to in about 4 minutes, and then I'll give you another chance to round up. Who wants to speak? Who wants to start? Yeah.
So just because there's not enough time to address there's not enough time to address various questions separately. So I'm just gonna try to touch on various issues very quickly. And I might inject a couple of things that nobody asked about, but it's my underhanded way of trying to get my point across. I remember there was this interview that Noam Chomsky conducted with David Barsamian, a great independent broadcaster, during the Iraq invasion 2003. David Barsamian asked Chomsky, he says, what can people do to stop the war? That was just before the war started. What can people do? And Chomsky wouldn't answer that question. He said, in many parts of the world, when people are facing any kind of injustice, they never ask what to do, they just do it. Okay? In Gaza, we don't ask what do we do when we are being invaded, we just resist. In every part of the world, especially in the global south, you are being colonized, you fight colonialism, you are being occupied, you fight occupation. There is a system of apartheid, you work to dismantle it, and so forth and so on. I understood Chomsky's answer as we should not have the privilege to be standing and just trying to reflect on what can be done under the circumstances. The reason that we often do is maybe because we are not informed of our relationship with that struggle. Maybe we don't feel close enough to it. Maybe we are worried about our own socioeconomic position in society and we don't want to lose or compromise or pay a price like a lot of people are being held accountable for their solidarity with Gaza right now. And there's a lot of genuine fear out there. So the moment we start reflecting too much on what we do, maybe we should be reflecting on the bigger question is why haven't we already done it? In my first visit to, I'm gonna try to avoid eye contact there, so otherwise you're gonna try to tell me how much time I have left. My first visit to South Africa, I was approached by two black men who did not seem to be part of that conference. They were wearing military fatigues that seemed quite tattered and old. And then they came and they wanted to talk to me. And I said, oh, but we can talk after the conference. They are working men. They said, we need to get back to work. We just want to thank you for everything you have done for South Africa. I thought there was some kind of a misunderstanding. Why thank me personally? And what have we done for South Africa? When they explained that they were trained by Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement in Algeria during the years of the underground anti-apartheid military struggle. And they said these uniforms were given to us by the PLO. That was a time that the PLO was not only a unifying figure for the Palestinian people, but it was teaching solidarity and building solidarity at a global scale. That was before all the academics and the politicians and the activists of today were even involved. Palestinians and South Africans and Algerians and Vietnamese and everybody else were already doing it. So this is something that I feel like is so important, that we need to reflect on the longer history of cooperation and struggle. And the most beautiful kind of struggle is the struggle that happens organically, that does not to be taught. People don't need to be confronted. I have friends from Kashmir, and we try to do as much as we can, considering what's happening in Gaza, to teach the world about what is happening in Kashmir. But sometimes I feel like there is this accusatory language. Like, we have done a lot for Palestine, why aren't Palestinians reciprocating? And it doesn't work that way. It's not a tit for tat. It's not a shaming game. We are all in this together. We fight together, we win together, we lose together, and hopefully we'll always win together. And my last point, we were asked about the enemy. Who is the enemy? Who is the enemy of the Palestinian people? Well, one of our greatest intellectuals of all time, Ghassan Kanafani, has already told us who are the enemies of the Palestinian people. You have imperialism and Zionism, and by the way, according to Kanafani, who was assassinated by the Mossad in July 1972, according to Kanafani, imperialism and Zionism are not two separate elements. They are exactly the same, and that's how Palestinians have always understood it. The second enemy are the corrupt Arab regimes, and that remains the case until today. Right now, you have thousands of activists from 80 different countries in Egypt trying to get to Gaza right now, and the Sisi's regime has unleashed his thugs against those activists to prevent them from getting to the Rafah point. The enemy of the 1930s remains the enemy until this day. And the third enemy is the feudalist Palestinian, landowners of back in the day, who stood with colonialism against the Palestinian peasants. And that remains our corrupt Palestinian Authority until today. So the enemy has always been the enemy. I think I will stop here just because I by far exceeded my time, but I thank you very, very much for your patience, for your solidarity, and for all the amazing work that you do for Palestine.
So just to answer the question, well, in fact, two of them all together. Intersectionality precisely means standing with other people's struggles. And as the quote from Sir Maura Machel I mentioned in the beginning, solidarity is not an act of charity, but as Ramzy was saying, mutual aid between forces fighting for the same objective. And I agree, and I'm glad you mentioned it, the history of our struggles in the continent. And in fact, the role Yasser Arafat played in bringing the African liberation movements and the Palestinian liberation, PLO at the time, together was something that people really remember through a joint history of struggle. But in terms of intersectional campaigns now, what I am saying is you can also challenge the Zionist narrative that is a Christian Zionist narrative, because it's the same Zionist Hasbara, just being manipulated and weaponized differently. And I think it is important for anti-Zionist Jews and anti-Zionist Jews in the West to do that. Because whilst we get accused of, that's the whataboutery that the Zionists use. What about the Sudan? What are you doing? Why are you talking about Palestine? What are you doing about the Sudan? What are you doing about the DRC? These are places close to hand. They are not doing anything at all themselves, obviously. And in fact, Israel is selling weapons, Elbit system weapons, to both the DRC and to the Rwandan government, which goes to the M23 rebels. Look at the role that the UAE played in trying to broker that normalization deal with Israel under the military government there. And now look at the mess that's going on in the Sudan, and as you mentioned, the mess that's going on in the DRC. The hand of Israel is all over every conflict, every repressive regime in our continent. In Kenya, the paramilitary police were trained by the Israelis. Those paramilitary police, recently when there was an anti-austerity demonstration, people disappeared and bodies were found randomly. You know, they're in it together. So that's what I'm saying. It's one struggle that we are fighting. And if we counter the Zionist lies that, what about this? You know, why are you caring about Palestine and not this and not that? They're closer to home. We're trying to say we are, and working with the Congolese Solidarity Campaign, working with other solidarity movements, because they all understand the centrality of Palestine. They understand that if we lose Palestine, we all lose, because those authoritarian regimes, those conflicts that are created in our continent are because Israel is, it's not just an offshoot, it is part of the colonial imperial project. So if you want to extract stuff from the DRC, if you want to extract stuff from all our countries, yes, Israel's a perfect vehicle for doing that. And that's why the Western countries, particularly the European countries, are going to argue at the end of the week that you can salvage a two-state solution and you can talk about recognizing a Palestinian state. Because what they're really saying is we're recognizing the Israeli state. They're not saying that we recognize the Palestinians' right to self-determination, the right to return, and the right to liberation from the river to the sea, are they? And so I think another thing we can do is challenge that, challenge our government, stand up and say, no, we reject Bantustans. We saw what happened. The only country in the world that recognized internationally the Bantustans in South Africa was Israel. They had embassies, supposedly embassies there. There were flags flying in Katznelson Street or whatever it's called, Dizengoff Street, the main street in Tel Aviv, of embassies of our Bantustans. No one else in the world recognized them. So why should we recognize Bantustans anywhere else? We can see what that's getting at. So I think there's a lot we can do, and a lot of people in the West are speaking up as anti-Zionist Jews can do to assist and to join the struggles, literally join up the struggles that we're fighting in South Africa and in our continent.
I will just add one or two things to the list of who or what is the enemy. And I would say it is the propaganda machine, the discourse of lies, pretty much the entirety of mainstream media. I would say almost every article written on Haaretz newspaper, which is supposedly progressive, etc., is peddling this discourse of lies, which is a real danger to move forward. That discourse of lies, for example, when we talk about apartheid, and we mentioned that, and there have been, as far as I know, 8 apartheid reports published. I actually created a table to compare the different reports. Only 3 of them actually discuss, as far as I'm concerned, Israeli apartheid. Because only 3 of them take into account the entirety of Palestine, which is under apartheid since the very creation of that Zionist race state, where more than half of all Palestinians cannot even go back to Palestine for one and only one reason, because they were born into the wrong ethnicity. And so these, we have to be kind of critical also about those who seem to be allies, seem to be pro-Palestinian, but are not fully there. We have to challenge at some point and to say, no, like if you are opposed to apartheid only in '67, only in the later occupation, the later settlements, the later form of apartheid, it's simply not good enough. It's not even the most part of apartheid. And I also challenged actually 3 UN special rapporteurs on that, on their perception of apartheid, and insisting on exactly what I told you today, that it is the entire story of apartheid. And apartheid is only one of many, many crimes that the Zionist race state is responsible for. We have to be very clear with a message, with what is the crime and what is the solution to that crime. And the solution is not tweaking the system, it is abolishing that system. You cannot tweak slavery, you could not tweak apartheid in South Africa. It's not about bettering the situation in the Bantustans. It is about abolishing that system of oppression, domination, and terror. Now, what can we do? There's plenty of stuff that we can do. They've got the bombs, we've got the people. We've got the hearts. We had 1 million people on the streets of London, more than once. The problem is, again, with the messaging, with what is it that we are demanding. When 1 million people chant ceasefire now, that is simply not good enough. It's not even a demand. We need much more than that. If only 1% or less than that took some form of a direct action, we could literally shut down that business of war that is happening in the UK. I personally joined a direct action group called Palestine Action. We went to smash up Elbit Systems headquarters, and they are doing it over and over and over again. It requires from us to be focused. It requires us to be consistent about it. It's not a one-off action. It is something that needs to happen again and again. And yes, sometimes people have to put themselves on the line, at least put their liberty on the line. When we put our liberty on the line, that also creates a dilemma for the other side, for the media. Why are these students in these Ivy League, universities putting their prestige on the line? Why are these, relatively elite activists in the UK, again, putting themselves on the line? This creates a dilemma, and that is important. And one more thing about direct action. In more usual times, I would say, okay, we can have civil disobedience. We are far from being in usual times. Direct action is something that is needed. It is essential. Is it enough? Probably not. But it is one tool that we have, and we can all do something. Direct action delivers the goods. We go to the source, and the difference between demonstrating and direct action is that demonstration is like asking the government, to deliver water. Direct action is digging the well and daring them to stop you. So this is what we do. We create the positive facts on the ground, we stop the negative crime, and we challenge this all the way to the courts and wherever that may take us. But we know that we have the people on our side, we have truth and justice on our side, and we will eventually be successful.
Is this working? I just thought I'll remind you that of the Jewish speakers at this Congress, practically everyone was arrested by the police in one country or another, and some of them in more than one country. This is the kind of example that we need to set up. Jews in Britain, I don't know the numbers in other countries, are 40 times more likely to be arrested by London police than any other citizen. Jews are a small minority, but they have been arrested in enormous numbers, and most of us are still facing so-called justice in our countries. This is an injustice, but we have to accept this, we have to expect it, and we have to use it. And I think that's what we were told now by a very courageous person that joined Palestine Action and spent quite a lot of time in jail, and it's not finished yet. So thank you, dear panel, for an excellent presentation, and please thank the panel before we actually go directly to the other panel, because we are 1 hour and 50 minutes late, I'm told. Okay.